Dr. Zalera stood in the cold, sterile lab, her golden eyes fixed on the large display screen. The holographic projection showed the latest battlefield reports, another human victory. Her sharp claws tapped against the metal console, frustration tightening her throat. It didn't make sense. By all logic, humans should have been crushed. The Vorthai Dominion was the strongest empire in the known galaxy. Their soldiers had enhanced muscles, reinforced bones, and near-impervious skin. Their bodies could withstand bullets, survive extreme conditions, and heal at unnatural speeds. Against them, humans were weak, fragile, and slow. And yet, humanity was winning. Zalera turned as High Commander Vrwn and entered the lab. His armored figure cast a long shadow across the room. "Doctor, we need answers," he growled. "How are these creatures still alive? What is their advantage?" She exhaled sharply. "I don't know. They should be losing." The Vorthai had studied humans for decades. Their anatomy was unimpressive, soft skin, brittle bones, a body dependent on external protection. They lacked natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armored plating. Their strength was mediocre. Their lifespan was short. They were biologically inferior in every possible way. And yet, battle after battle, humans adapted. Survived. Countered every Vorthai strategy. It was almost unnatural. Zalera's fingers danced over the console, pulling up the latest biological scans of captured human soldiers. She enlarged the data on one subject, a wounded human male, taken 3 days ago. He had suffered multiple injuries, including a broken leg and internal bleeding. Logically, he should have been dead by now. But the readings showed something terrifying. His body was healing faster than expected. Not like the Vorthai, who had designed their regenerative traits through genetic engineering. This was something else. His immune system had neutralized infections before they even began. His bones were repairing at an accelerated rate. His muscles were adapting, growing stronger, denser, as if his body had learned from the injuries. Zalera narrowed her eyes. No species should be capable of this level of rapid adaptation. Her voice was calm, but there was a new unease creeping into it. "We need to dissect him." Commander Vrwn nodded. "Do whatever you must." The room shifted as the doors slid open, and the human prisoner was dragged inside. He was young, maybe mid-20s, battered but still standing. His dark eyes held defiance, even with his hands bound. Zalera studied him. What was it about humans that made them so unbreakable? The prisoner met her gaze and smirked. "You're wasting your time," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. Zalera's brow furrowed. "You don't seem concerned about what's coming." He chuckled. "Because you don't understand what you're dealing with." Something about his confidence made her uneasy. Outside, alarms blared. The walls trembled. The lights flickered. Zalera's stomach dropped as a transmission crackled through the speakers. "Human reinforcements have breached the facility." She turned back to the prisoner, but he was already smiling. The prisoner's secret. Zalera's golden eyes flickered between the alarms blaring overhead and the human prisoner standing before her. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't struggling against his restraints. He was smiling. Outside the lab, the Vorthai soldiers barked orders. Heavy footsteps pounded through the corridors. The humans had breached the facility. Zalera's claws clenched against the cold metal console. This was impossible. No species should have been able to fight past Vorthai defenses, not with their superior technology and enhanced warriors. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The human smirked, his dark eyes sharp with amusement. "I told you," he said, voice calm despite the chaos. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Zalera's gaze snapped back to him. "Then explain it to me." His smirk deepened. Why would I give you the answer for free? A deep growl rumbled from Commander Vryn's throat. The towering Vorthai warrior stepped forward, his armored fist slamming into the human stomach. The force should have crushed ribs, ruptured organs, but the prisoner barely flinched. Zalera's breath hitched. That shouldn't be possible. Vryn's expression twisted with confusion. What? The prisoner straightened. His wrists were still bound, his face still bruised from earlier beatings, but his body was already healing. The blood on his skin was drying faster than normal. His breathing was stabilizing. He lifted his head and grinned. I adapt, he said simply. Zalera's mind raced. Adapt? No. That wasn't normal. Even the most advanced species had limits. But humans, they kept going. Vryn lunged again, but this time, the prisoner moved first. With a sharp twist, he shifted his stance, using his own weight to throw Vryn off balance. The Vorthai commander stumbled, just for a second, but it was enough. The human should not have been strong enough to do that. Zalera took a step back, her claws hovering over the emergency lock on the containment chamber. If this human could fight back even while injured and restrained, what were the others capable of? Before she could react, an explosion ripped through the facility. The force sent her crashing against the console. Sparks flew. Metal groaned. The emergency lights flickered, bathing the room in a deep red glow. Zalera gasped, trying to regain her balance. The doors slammed open. And then, they were there. More humans, armed and battle-worn, their eyes cold, their movements sharp. They looked like predators. The leading soldier, a woman with a jagged scar across her cheek, raised a rifle toward Vryn. Step aside, she ordered, her voice low and steady. Vryn hesitated. He was a war commander. He had crushed species that defied the Dominion. But as he looked at the humans, something changed in his expression. He saw it too. They weren't just fighting. They were evolving. And now, Zalera realized, they weren't afraid of the Vorthai anymore. The evolution problem. Smoke curled through the ruined lab, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. Zalera pushed herself off the shattered console, her sharp vision flicking between the human soldiers and the unconscious form of Commander Vryn, who lay crumpled on the ground. She had never seen a Vorthai warrior taken down so easily. Not by a species as fragile as humans. Yet, here they stood, strong, breathing heavily, eyes filled with determination. The leader, the scarred human woman, kept her rifle trained on Zalera. You're coming with us, she said flatly. Zalera's claws twitched, but she forced herself to stay still. You don't understand, she murmured. I'm not your enemy. The human snorted. That's funny, coming from someone who dissects our people. The human prisoner, the one Zalera had been studying, stepped forward, rolling his shoulders as if shaking off the last remnants of his restraints. His wounds were gone. Bruises fading. Strength returning. Zalera's stomach twisted. It wasn't just healing. It was transformation. The scarred woman noticed it too. She glanced at him, her brow furrowing. Carter, you good? The man, Carter, flexed his fingers, then looked at his hands like they were foreign objects. I feel stronger. Zalera inhaled sharply. Of course. It was happening again. The reason why humanity kept surviving battles they should have lost. The reason why they adapted faster than any species the Vorthai had ever encountered. They weren't just evolving over generations. They were evolving in real time. Her breath caught in her throat. The Vorthai had spent centuries perfecting their species, gene editing, selective breeding, biological enhancements. They had pushed themselves to the peak of engineered evolution. But humans didn't need engineering. They were built for change. Zalera suddenly felt very, very small. The scarred woman, probably their leader, motioned toward her soldiers. "Secure her," she ordered. 2 humans moved forward, their grips firm but not rough. Zalera didn't resist. There was no point. She needed answers. Carter, her former prisoner, watched her closely. "You're afraid," he said. Zalera scoffed. "I am a scientist. I do not fear. I analyze." Carter smirked. "Yeah. Then analyze this." He reached out, and sliced open his own palm with a piece of metal from the wreckage. Zalera flinched. What was he doing? The wound bled for only a second. Then, right before her eyes, it closed. No medical devices. No nanotechnology. No external help. Pure, raw, biological adaptation. Her claws clenched. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The human woman smirked. "You see it now, don't you?" Zalera swallowed hard. They weren't just winning the war. They were becoming something else entirely. And the Vorthai had no idea what they had just started. The fear of the unknown. The ship rattled as it broke through the planet's atmosphere, leaving behind the smoldering wreckage of the Vorthai facility. Zalera sat, restrained, on one of the cold metal benches in the cargo hold, her sharp eyes darting across the human soldiers. They were unlike any species she had ever studied, not just because they fought back, but because they changed. Across from her, Carter sat with his elbows on his knees, flexing his fingers, still mesmerized by what had happened back in the lab. His wounds were completely healed. Not even a scar remained. Minutes ago, he was bleeding. Now, he was stronger. Zalera had spent her life dissecting creatures, mapping genetic structures, calculating the potential of evolutionary traits. But what she had just witnessed. It broke every law of biology she knew. The scarred human woman, still unnamed, leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You look like someone just told you your gods were fake," she said, amusement flickering across her features. Zalera exhaled, struggling to keep her composure. "This shouldn't be possible." Carter smirked. "And yet, here we are." Her golden eyes flicked toward him. "How long has this been happening?" The woman, the leader, spoke first. "We don't know. We've been at war for years, and humans have always been survivors. But lately, it's accelerating." Zalera's throat tightened. Accelerating? This wasn't just adaptation. This was forced evolution under pressure. Her mind whirled with calculations, probabilities, worst-case scenarios. If this was happening across the human race, if this wasn't just an isolated anomaly, the Vorthai were doomed. A deep, primal instinct settled in her gut, fear. She had never feared a species before. She had never needed to. The Vorthai were superior in every way. They conquered planets, reshaped civilizations, absorbed cultures into their own. They never lost. And yet, here she was. Captured. Watching a human soldier evolve before her eyes. This war was no longer about territory. It was about survival. And for the first time in Zalera's life, she wasn't sure which side would win. The unseen battlefield. Zalera had always believed war was fought with weapons, strategy, and superior strength. The Vorthai had perfected the art of conquest, crushing weaker civilizations beneath their genetic supremacy. But now, strapped to a chair in a dimly lit human warship, she realized she had been fighting on the wrong battlefield. This war wasn't just happening on the ground. It wasn't decided by weapons, tactics, or technology. It was happening inside their bodies. Carter sat across from her, still flexing his fingers, his expression shifting between wonder and unease. Whatever had happened to him in the lab wasn't normal, not even by human standards. The scarred woman, now identified as Commander Rains, watched Zalera carefully. "You understand what's happening, don't you?" Zalera swallowed hard. She did. But she didn't want to say it aloud. She had seen species adapt before. Evolution was slow, methodical, a process that took thousands, sometimes millions, of years. Organisms developed resistance to disease. They adjusted to harsher climates. They became slightly stronger, slightly faster. But humans weren't just adapting. They were rewriting themselves in real time. Carter should have been dead. His wounds should have left him weakened, drained. Instead, his body had learned from the trauma. It had rewired itself. Strengthened itself. It wasn't natural. It wasn't possible. Yet here he sat, alive and breathing. More than alive. More than human. Zalera inhaled sharply. "Your bodies, they're not just repairing damage. They're learning from it. Improving." Commander Rains nodded. "That's what we've been seeing. Every battle we survive, we get better. Stronger. We don't just heal. We come back, different." Zalera's claws curled against the armrest. This shouldn't be happening. No species evolves at this speed. Carter exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well. Guess we didn't get the memo." Zalera's mind spun. If this continued, if every human on every battlefield was undergoing these same changes, the Vorthai wouldn't just lose the war. They would become obsolete. And if humans ever turned their attention beyond survival, if they ever decided to conquer instead of defend, nothing in the galaxy would be able to stop them. For the first time, Zalera wasn't just afraid. She was terrified. And worse, she wasn't sure if she wanted to stop it. The tipping point. Zalera had spent her life believing in the unshakable laws of biology. Evolution was slow. Controlled. Governed by nature's unyielding hand. But what she had seen on this human warship, it changed everything. Carter should have been dead. His injuries should have crippled him. And yet, not only had he survived, he had evolved. His body had learned. Adapted. Strengthened. And if one human could do this, how many more were changing right now? The realization sat in her chest like a heavy stone. This war was already over. The Vorthai just didn't know it yet. Commander Rains stood at the ship's control panel, staring at the transmission reports. More human squads had broken through enemy lines. More injured soldiers were recovering at unnatural rates. More Vorthai weapons were failing. The balance of power wasn't just shifting. It was collapsing. Rains exhaled sharply, glancing at Zalera. "You understand now, don't you?" Zalera's throat was dry. Her mind whirled with calculations, probabilities, worst-case scenarios. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. They were changing. Becoming something else. She had spent years studying genetics, searching for the perfect species, one that could endure, thrive, outlast the cruel indifference of the universe. And here they were. Soft, fragile creatures who should have been wiped out long ago. But they didn't break. They bent. Adapted. Became something new. And now, standing on this ship, watching the enemy she had once pitted rise into something far greater than her own species, she felt the impossible. Hope. Carter leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching her carefully. "You're scared." Zalera met his gaze, and for the first time in her life, she spoke the truth. "Yes." He exhaled, then smirked. "Good." She blinked, frowning. "Good." Carter shrugged. "Means you understand. And that means you have a choice." Zalera narrowed her eyes. "A choice?" Commander Rains turned fully now, crossing her arms. You're a scientist. You could warn your people. Tell them to retreat. Tell them to run. But deep down, you know the truth. Zalera's claws curled against her palm. What truth? Rain smiled. You don't want to stop us. You want to see what happens next. Zalera inhaled sharply. And in that moment, she realized. They were right. The birth of something new, final part 800 words. Zalera had never hesitated before. Science was absolute. Data dictated truth. The universe was cruel, but it was predictable. But now? Now she stood at the edge of something unknown. The ship's engines hummed beneath her feet. The holographic display flickered with real-time battlefield reports, Vorthai forces falling back. Human squadrons pushing forward. But this wasn't just a victory. This was an extinction event. Carter leaned forward, watching her with that unsettling, knowing look. You're still thinking about it. Zalera's claws twitched against the metal bench. You don't understand what this means. Commander Rain scoffed. Oh, we understand just fine. We're winning. Zalera snapped her head toward her. No. You're changing. Silence. The tension thickened. Even the humans who had been casually reloading their weapons now watched her carefully. Zalera took a breath, forcing herself to speak. You think this is just adaptation? An advantage in war. But it's not. Her golden eyes flicked to Carter, who, just hours ago, had been bleeding out on a cold metal table. Now, his body pulsed with renewed strength. His muscles had restructured themselves. His cells had rewritten the laws of biology. This isn't just evolution, Zalera whispered. She met Rain's gaze. You are no longer human. A sharp stillness filled the room. Carter exhaled, running a hand through his hair. His fingers trembled, just barely, but Zalera saw it. He was afraid, too. Rains, however, only grinned. That's the thing, Doctor, she said softly. Maybe we were never meant to stay human. Zalera's breath caught. The weight of her realization pressed down on her like the crushing gravity of a collapsing star. The Vorthai weren't losing this war. They were witnessing the birth of something new. And the universe would never be the same again.